Follow me.
Welcome, Sarah. Thanks so much for joining us.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Maybe we could just start with you giving us an introduction to yourself and provide a quick overview of what you do as a motion director.
Yeah, sure. So my background was in acting many moons ago. And I think probably from around 2010, I shifted to more of a movement director, motion director, movement coach, however you want to want to describe it. I was always, obviously, as an actor, into performance and really loved embodiment, and really loved kind of how movement and nonverbal communication, just the hands, how you walk, how you facial express, etc. That kind of storytelling. So yeah, from about 2010, I've really worked in TV, film, theatre, animation, VR, motion capture being one of those realms. It's a good mix. I don't just work in motion capture, but I work sort of with actors on character performance, animators on animated performance. So a good variety.
Great. So look, one of the productions that we're fascinated by emerged during COVID that we saw you were part of. The Royal Shakespeare Company produced Dream during the extended COVID-19 lockdowns in answer to audience need to connect and to be entertained. So I wondered if you could describe the performance of Dream and the streamed event and just touch on why they chose this particular approach.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really interesting journey. Originally, before COVID hit, it was going to be a VR experience. So virtual reality with the audience in headsets, and Robin, the creative director, and Pippa Hill, the dramaturg at the RSC, were starting to develop that. So it was going to be more about the world in which the audience could go and move around in and see. And it was, I think it was going to be a performance, but it was more about the audience getting lost and being transported and connected to another world. So initially, it wasn't going to be a 25 minute live online performance. So that happened very organically, very swiftly. And then that's when I came on board, because I've had the experience of working with actors. So originally it wasn't going to be as performance driven, definitely not as live embodied performance driven.
This project is a sort of amazing hybrid of gaming technology, orchestral music and theatre.
The project is a huge collaboration involving lots of different specialisms focused on performance using technology.
It's really about us seeing whether we can present the world of A Midsummer Night's Dream and allow them to interact in that world live without leaving their homes.
So also, I think in the sense of why Midsummer Night's Dream, I think it's just so beautiful. And I think it was chosen because it was very relevant to, the piece that was explored in terms of climate, in terms of, human destruction of that, and in terms of us having to wake up to that. I think it's the same story, isn't it? That just needs to be kept drilled into us because we're not listening. And I think it's otherworldly. I think it's a production that appeals to children. It's a production that appeals to adults. And I think for this, it was interesting because it was taking the sprites or the fairies in a way that we'd never seen them before in that classic text. So having this medium also allowed the team as storytellers to tell quite a different story, but still very much lean to, of course, the traditional Midsummer Night's Dream, but it was called Dream.
What rolls out is a glimpse at a vast Shakespeare-inspired universe that we've grown very fond of along the way.
Central to the show is a huge, earth-shattering, tumultuous storm. It's a very good metaphor for what we've all been through. In the last year, we've all experienced things being taken away from us, things that we love, things that we delight in.
It is magical, it's a curious space, and we hope that the characters that we're presenting offer up a challenge to the norms.
You've seen the actors react live to things that the audience have done. You feel like you've been in a large group experiencing together a story and a journey.
Can you just, I've seen one of the performances played back online, but could you just describe for those who haven't seen Dream what the production looked like and how the components came together?
So it was a live motion capture kind of animated performance, and I think it was between I don't know 10, I think there was 10 days, but there were sometimes more than one shows in a day. What it could look like to a viewer watching it was that it was pre-recorded. It looked like an animation that had a lot of post-production potentially done to it, and they were watching that. But no, it was completely the opposite way around. We had to work live, so all the actors were in a studio in Portsmouth in their motion capture suits, and it was basically a fusion of live theatre, but they didn't have an audience there. They had technicians, they had myself, they had the other members of the creative team in a room or nearby in the space. And it was literally action, and they went all the way through the production. They were driving the characters, so the characters of Cobweb, Mustard Seed, Puck, Peas Blossom, Moth, through their bodies, through their gestures. So sometimes, a character like Little Moth, for example, was just, the hands. Big Moth was the whole body. And so they were driving the story literally through their bodies. And of course, there was text as well. And what the audience was seeing was the animated version, as it were, of that performance. So we used, it was all in real time. Unreal Engine was, and I can't go too much into the tech because it's sort of beyond my scope a little bit. But there was no post-production at all. So what was seen was what was happening in that room at that time. So if Moth raised his right arm, then Moth, the avatar, the animated character, didn't have an arm, but had a kind of a wings or many little moths, for example. If Darassi, playing Moth, just using him as an example, decided one performance to turn around and spin and run one way, well, then obviously in the animated performance that the viewers were seeing, that's where Moth would go. And it could be different every night. And that's where the theatre element, came into it. So, but having said that, though, if we went too much into that improvisation, then the readability of that wouldn't work for the viewers. So it had to be quite strategically choreographed because the world that they were in, literally in the studio, was much smaller than the world that was seen on the screen. So there was a lot of cheating of space. There were some shots that were, when I say pre-recorded, the animation wasn't pre-recorded, but when the environment shifted, for example, from, let's say, the tree to the field or the forest to the underworld, for example, they were cued. So a bit like in theatre, when there's a lighting change or a scene change, they were cued. So we had to hit those beats quite succinctly. And if we didn't, then the that carried on. So we just have to catch up with it.
And I understand, we won't go into it too much, but the Royal Shakespeare Company had been doing a lot of R&D, about using different technologies. They're quite interested in telling the story to reach new audiences in different ways using technology, which is great. So off the back of this, my understanding is that the audience had some way of participating in the live stream, in the live performance. How did that work?
It was really important that there was definitely some onboarding beforehand. So as if you would go to the live theatre, the curtains are about to kind of open. So even before the performance even started, how many people were viewing at that particular time? How many seconds, did the audience have before the show started? So it was really building that sense of, okay, they're at their home or wherever they were, probably at home because they were in lockdown as well, with their computers, with their iPads or with their phones, about to watch this performance. And we wanted to really honor that it was still live, as if they were going to the theatre. So sit down, get ready, here's the time, here's the music, here's what you can do. You can read some of the behind the scenes before, as if you were reading a program, for example. So even though that wasn't direct connectivity or interaction, it still was intentional, so they could be part of that, be part of that experience. You could choose, actually, when you booked the tickets to see the show, whether you wanted to be a passive audience member and just sit back and watch the show, or you could be an interactive audience member. And it was pinging the kind of fireflies, showing Puck the way, catapulting them into one of the scenes. Was that the best way? I don't know, and I have to say, and I'm going to be very honest, I did prefer the passive, approach myself. However, we had to explore that. And I think as a team, collaboratively, in hindsight, we would do that differently. Was that enough for the audience really to enjoy being, pinging a catapult in, the fireflies? It's amazing how much work behind the scenes goes into that to enable that to happen. But was it satisfying for the audience? Was that enough?
So you mentioned that, so obviously you're the motion director. So I'm really interested to hear a bit more about your role in the production as a motion director. How much was your time sort of consumed with the motion capture, and how much was the performance as actors, and how much was kind of, I guess, the creative reimagining of A Midsummer Night's Dream?
Yeah. There was the 7 performers plus Tom come in a little bit later, who had the handheld camera. And so that performance was like directing a play, working with the actors. So it was really working with Robin as more of the kind of art creative director of the world and the assets and what that looked like. And then how the kind of the developers of that brought that world to life. So then we, as the bodies, well, not myself, but sort of physically directing the bodies into then becoming those characters. How can we get Jurassic as Moth into the avatar of Moth? How can we get Maggie as Maggie into the eyeball of Cobweb, for example? So it was a devised piece. So we had a very loose storyboard, a script that the creative team we had at the beginning before we got the actors on board. And we knew the kind of the beats of the story. There was going to be Puck coming into this world. He would meet his friends, he would meet his sprites, and they would all guide him along this journey to collect fireflies. There's going to be a big storm. There's going to be that chaos, that kind of pivotal point of the story. And then it's the rebuilding of that forest again. And how we were going to tell that story physically, we didn't know. When we first walked into the room, it was like, okay, there wasn't even full character designs at that point. So yes, we knew that Cobweb was going to be an eye, but how Cobweb was going to be an eye, we didn't know. Yes, we knew that Mustard Seed was going to be a face, but how that was going to be driven, we didn't know. So we would spend most of the mornings playing in a room that was not tech. We would just play, rehearse, workshop the characters, talk about their relationships, talk about who are they, what's their backstory, digging deep into the psychology. I mean, you might think, gosh, but it's just an eye, or, it's just a moth. But no, you're still doing the conventional actor process, and the actors were phenomenal at that. They worked so hard individually and together. So the mornings were really playing. We would warm up physically. We would interrogate the text. We would improvise, based on the characters' relationships. We knew that we wanted, with Moth and Puck, for example, a little bit of a flirtation, a little bit of a playfulness. So we would play with that. How can we find that with M and Darassi? How can we find that in their own bodies, and just through space, and just through proximity, and through, touch was hard because it was still COVID, right? So we weren't really allowed to use contact, but we did, in the sense of if it drove the story forward, if we needed it to lift and for functional purposes. But how could they show that relationship through body language, through gesture, through posture, through levels, all of these physical things that come into play. And then we would find things, then we'd go downstairs to the actual motion capture studio. And then this would be where the struggles would be. We'd find something quite beautiful, in that rehearsal room. And then we'd come down and it just wouldn't read, or it wouldn't work, with the avatar. So we'd have to shift again. It's a lot of playing, a lot of patience, a lot of discovery, and until we found those moments, that worked for the actor and also for the avatar. And the other thing is, the actors can't see themselves. I mean, we had a big LED screen, on, or kind of at the front, that it was the audience's view, basically. So in rehearsals, we could see that as reference. So you could see that, oh yeah, there's a puddle there. Puck would go down and, take their hand and maybe just play with the stream or the river or the puddle, or whatever it may be. So in rehearsal, M would spend hours just being in the forest and exploring. But then in a way, I had to be M's eyes, because if M was busy looking at the screen all the time, then you would just see Puck kind of looking around randomly. So Puck still had to look at the stream. M couldn't see it, but I had to say, it's there, M, or it's more to the right, or it's more to the left. And that's where the choreography come in. We had to really find where these places were in the virtual world, make them match the physical world. And sometimes they would shift and change, and that was hard. So it was a mixture of rehearsing, interrogating text, Pippa was amazing at finding lines from the play that weren't said by the sprites. They were said maybe by Oberon or another character, but just fit that moment. We still wanted to honor A Midsummer Night's Dream and Shakespeare's words.
Was the lack of facial performance a challenge, and how did you address that?
A good challenge, and I think particularly as a movement director and working with physical performers, how else can you convey anger, confusion, vulnerability, urgency, whatever it might be? And I'm being very broad there because there's many layers of, all of those emotions. There's not just one way to show anger, there's many. But how can, for example, Maggie's eyeball be stubborn and obstinate and fixed, just being an eye? Or how can Peas Blossom be playful in one moment and then have this sense of urgency, but without having a face to express that? Then you have to use the rest of the body. It's like working with masks. You have to use weight, you have to use postural shifts, you have to use what part of your body is communicating in that time. Is the chest open? Is it closed? Am I standing asymmetrically? Am I, tilting my head down? Am I opening, my shape? Am I using time to communicate? Do I slow down my sense of time? Do I speed up a moment? And I don't just mean verbally, I mean just in a gesture, for example. Can I use a shape of my body to convey that emotion? Proximity with another actor. Flow, how do I flow? Do I move with that other character? Again, thinking Moth and Puck, in a sort of free flow, lightweight way versus the storm, and then they tense, and then you see that sort of difference in their muscular tension. And I think all of that emotion that is here, we tend to, if you think of now, you and I are framed with our faces in a Zoom, for example, but the rest of our bodies are involved in that communication, but we're using this mostly to express. So it's like, how can we find other ways? And in this play, otherworldly ways, because it was otherworldly.
And then we have audio, which is interactive as well. We are able to take the movements of the actors in the motion capture with an amazing piece of software called Gestrument, and this allows the actors to play digital instruments with their movement and interact together.
Can you please describe what Gestrument is and how you and the musical directors and actors collaborated with this tool?
Yeah, absolutely. Gestrument is a creation by Jesper Nordin, a composer, and he has founded and created this wonderful tool called Gestrument. And it was the first time I'd ever been exposed to it myself. So it was like playtime. It was so exciting. It's a tool whereby the actors have agency to or the performers have agency to manipulate the music, the soundtrack, the composition. And so we had a few scores of music within the piece, and each character with it for this, and it could be done in different ways, had a particular instrument. Let's say Peace Blossom had the da-da-da-da, like the piano. If Jamie raised his arms up, it would make it sort of louder and higher pitched, for example. If he brought his hands down and squatted, or down to the floor, it was a lower kind of or maybe softer, for example. You can map it in any way. So Jesper, he's a wizard, behind the scenes. You could map how Gestrument is interacted with the performer. So we would play, for example, arms up would do one thing, arms down another. It could be the proximity to a place on the stage. So the closer the actor goes to that block, and in the show it could be the tree, the louder that music becomes, or that particular instrument. And then the further away they are from that tree, for example, the quieter, the softer that sound may become. So the actor can sort of move in a way that can literally, you're creating an orchestra. So it was beautiful. Like, we had so much sort of playtime. I wanted more, as I just expressed, with Jesper observing and also musically directing, and myself movement directing them to play together. So they weren't just doing up down, they were dancing, and sometimes it could be open and closed. So Maggie had some mapping that was not just up and down, it's open and closed, or forward and back. They were mapped differently.
Yes. And I remember you saying that to pause it, they had to pinch their fingers because the sensors for the music are all built into their mocap suits. So so you can imagine if you weren't pinching or at the right time, everything would get very loud.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then that can be frustrating for the actor, because at that moment they want to express, they want to open their hands. As I said, they want to lean on their face. I'm just using that as an example, but they want to wave or whatever it is, but they can't functionally because they're having to stop the harp or the piano.
Speech. Yeah.
So you'll notice, well, not only didn't we have faces, we didn't have articulate hands. And because of the scene and because of the playfulness of him and Puck, there was a lot of this going on, and so therefore there was a lot of music going on, or there had to be a lot of pinching, but then that didn't lend itself very well to the actual story, right? The interplay that needed to happen between the two actors. So there had to be a shift to sort of downplay his instrument or lower it a little bit, because otherwise it would just be there all the time and it was too much. When do we need it? Why do we need it? We could cue it, we could turn it off if we really wanted to. And there was a whole magical sound team, that was there again in another room behind the scenes, turning things down, turning things up, as you would in a live performance, because in case that happened, in case Jamie just went, and it continued.
And at the end of the live stream, I know we come out of, the story world, and we get to see the motion capture stage and all the actors on it. And I just wondered, what was the purpose of that? Was there a storytelling function, as well as giving us a little behind the scenes reveal? Was there a purpose that connected into the Midsummer Night Dream story?
Yeah, I think so. And I really fought to have that in, when we had to keep making compromises and sacrifices. And it was to show, there was different reasons. It's the play within a play. So classic Shakespeare, there's a play, there's this going on, but there's also that going on. So there's that theme there as well, from that sort of storytelling and lending, to Shakespeare, play within a play. Also to show functionally what's going on, to show that what the audience are seeing, this is what goes on behind the scenes, and this is beautiful too, if you liked it, and there's so much going on. It's not just Puck moving around a forest. There's Ed, there's Phoebe, there's Maggie, there's Lauren, there's Darassi, there's Jamie, there's everyone, there's Tom, he was the handheld camera, obviously you couldn't see him because he's moving the camera, but there's this ensemble of 8 performers constantly working together. I mean, they weren't just like, oh, my part's done, let's sit back. They were moving the set, lifting up Puck, taking the weight, moving, different things, and creating other parts of the forest. It wasn't just their characters. It was maybe the storm, it was the gestument, it was the music, it was a leaf, etc. So it was kind of to show some of that, and also to show the technology. This was an R&D piece, and therefore it's not just an animated film like you're used to seeing in post-production. And I think, there's a lot of expectations of what an animation should look like and the quality of that. And were we up to the standard of a Disney production that has lots and lots of post-productions? No, but that's not what it was about. This was still a live performance. So it was really just to remind, a nudge to remind the audience of that as well, to show them that there was something else going on. Here's a glimpse of that you will never see. You never see that in an animation, within the animation of how that works. But I think it also, from a storytelling perspective, showed the vulnerability of Puck, and the fragility. And then how, I'm going back to what was, I mentioned the climate, why dream, but it wasn't just that. There was many reasons. It's about how we have to come together, and how that ensemble of performers were literally there because Puck couldn't see, to guide and to enable them to go to another part of the forest, enable them to jump onto another block. And actually you need each other, and especially during that COVID time, and that touch that we were all missing, and that relationships we were all missing, a kind of a nudge to that as well. Like, no, we need each other. Puck can't just do this alone. Behind the scenes, you need actors, you need friends, you need family, you need that. So I think it was poignant for different reasons. Whether that was translated or not, who knows? But it doesn't matter. It was there because it was there. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sarah. It's been absolutely fascinating to hear about the production of Dream and your role as movement director and motion director. So I really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you for allowing me to share.